afternoon, Mumbrella. Very pleased to be here. It's my first time here presenting for you. So I'm going to talk about what's happening with distrust and how brands can win back trust. So I've just arrived in Asia recently to do this presentation. But before you hear from me, let's hear from someone else who's recently arrived in Asia as well, who's pretty controversial when it comes to trust.
We just came out with a fragrance. It's called Success by Trump, and it's sold at Macy's. It is a great fragrance. I'd like to say that if you put it on, anything you want will come true.
If any of you work in the beauty industry, I'm sorry that your careers are now over, but it's important to look at personalities like Donald Trump, because he's one of the reasons, along with lots of other politicians, that trust has become so diminished. So we're going to look in this opening section at how, it's the media, it's politicians which have created this crisis in trust. But we are going to look at the good news. We are seeing a reaction. We're also seeing accountability come back through things like AI fact-checking services, professional journalism as well. So we'll look at how consumers are going to want proof and efficacy. And we'll look at how we think at Mintel brands can win back trust. So we'll look at that need for proof, facts. We'll look at visual techniques, how they can be used to win back trust as well. We'll look at the fact that consumers actually want to trust brands, because, trusted brands save them time. That convenience factor is very, very important. We'll look at the fact that the new era of digital marketing we live in gives brands an opportunity to be more honest, more personable, more friendly in their advertising approaches as well. We'll look at the appeal of local, going small. And finally, we'll look at how we think brands can win trust by being more pioneering, more politically progressive too. So let's look at the context. Why are we here talking about trust at this event? Well, trust has never been in such bad shape. In 2016, the Oxford Dictionary made post-truth its word of the year, talking about denoting circumstances in which objective facts are less influential in shaping public opinion than things like appeals to emotion. And 2016 was bad enough. The Edelman Trust Barometer, straddling 2016-17, recorded its worst ever results. So trust in the institutions of government, media, NGOs, and business down across the board globally. The media distrust scoring its worst ever drop we've seen. Now, let's give that some context. Let's pick out some of the worst performing countries in the APAC region. So distrust in South Korea, only 28% of people trusting the government. Huge drop. Obviously, we know the context for that. If your president ends up being impeached, that is going to obviously create a crisis in political trust. Staying with politics, we also have really low levels of trust in Australia. I'm sorry to suggest that this is how Australians spend all their time. It's just a lazy, generic image for Australia. But distrust in government in Australia had gone down drastically as well. Now we know there's some context for that around citizenship, dual nationality. That's eroded confidence in the government across Australia too. We also have distrust in the media. Remember the Edelman figures, a 5-point drop in media trust, the worst performing sector of all. Now, we've got Stanley Kubrick here, the film director. He famously is alleged to have filmed the American moon landings in 1969. Conspiracy theories say America never landed on the moon. Kubrick filmed it. So that's why we've got him up in the media distrust section. Now, the kind of star performers, if you like, in the highest levels of media distrust would again be Australia, only a third of consumers trusting their media. Japan, really bad performance from Japan in terms of media distrust. Context around that, no less a person than the UN Special Reporter David Kaye, raising serious concerns about the relationships between the Japanese government and the media in that country, and that's created general distrust too. But let's move beyond just the APAC region and look at this generally. One of the reasons we've got such strong distrust in media is we're using social media to get our news. 2/3 of Americans using this resource in that regard. And the thing about getting your news through social media, it means you're not necessarily getting what is most important, what is most qualified. You're simply getting what is most popular. The stories consumers are reading tend to be the ones which are just being shared more than any other sector. And that's why we get these prevalence of these fake news stories shared on social media, like this endless story about the birther movement, alleging that President Obama wasn't actually born in the United States. He dispelled this back in 2011, but it's still persisting on social media. And fake news is becoming an industry in its own right. So we look at the fact this is Velez, Macedonia. It's been called the world capital of fake news, home to more than 100 pro Donald Trump websites, which are just regurgitating fake news stories supporting him, attacking his opponents. And the reason people are doing this is automated advertising revenue. You know, the average wage is pretty low in Veles, Macedonia. You can quickly make thousands of dollars if you have a news site propagating fake news. And this is developing and evolving all the time. And, you know, troubling looking at what's happening across Europe, particularly in the UK, with the recent spate of terrorist attacks across Europe. We've got this new phenomenon of people creating these hoax tweets, talking about, you know, loved ones, relatives supposedly gone missing in terrorist incidents. Very disturbing, and it's a sort of virus in society. Now, we're here today because this whole virus in terms of distrust. It's toxic and it's spreading to companies. So again, back to Edelman, some of the worst performing countries in terms of poor levels of trust in the media. So you see the figures here for South Korea, see the figures here for Japan as well. So we're starting to distrust businesses as much as governments and media. Now, why is that? Well, political scrutiny, the kind of thing, investigative journalism, is also targeting brands. Louis Vuitton, made in Italy, shoes. They're not made in Italy. An investigative report by The Guardian found that actually these shoes are made in Transylvania, Romania, and only finished off in Italy. So this is eroding public trust in brands going forward as well. So much so, our recent research at Mintel across Europe, these are the figures for the people who generally agree that they trust the food and drink industry to provide food which is safe to consume. You know, the very basic thing we expect from the food and drink industry. Very, very disappointing levels of trust in regards to that, I think you'll agree. Okay, so that's the context. That's why trust is in such a poor state. How can we win back the trust of consumers? Well, I think one thing is to bring facts, to bring accountability. We're actually starting to see that happen in the media. You're starting to see a bit of a reaction, all the coverage around fake news. We're starting to see a bit of an uptick in people paying for professional media, paying to get access to that. We've seen that happen in online publications in America. We are starting to see that happen in Australia as well. So you're starting to see a big growth in people paying for professional media, for the accountability of that. And accountability is also being foisted upon politicians and the media by artificial intelligence as well. So you've got things like digital democracy here, using facial recognition technology and basically the logs of political legislation, hearings, to see exactly how did that politician vote, what did they say. So accountability is being foisted upon politicians in this regard. We've also seen it happen in the media as well. Claimbuster from Australia uses AI to scrutinize and check journalism as well, weeding out fake news in that regard. So we're seeing a reaction in politics and media as well. And social media is trying to get its house in order as well. So you're getting groups like Facebook acting to try and raise the editorial credibility of the content which is being published on its site as well. When we talk to consumers at Mintel, they want facts. You know, if they perceive a product to be high quality, they want quantification for that. And this is something that's growing, that expectation amongst consumers. We've seen that happen with Chinese consumers we've spoken to. When we talk to consumers in Thailand, particularly younger consumers, they want accountability. They want certification when it comes to buying products as well, if they're going to trust them as well. And look at the beauty industry. Now, I don't want to offend anybody involved in the beauty industry, but it's not an industry known necessarily for its efficacy. When you do get a product like this Boots No. 7 range from the UK, which is scientifically proven to have anti-aging effects, the commercial success is very, very strong indeed. So facts is one way of winning trust, okay, quantifying things. Seeing is believing. This section, we're going to look at how visual techniques can be used to bring back trust as well. So if you look at the youngest consumers we speak to at Mintel, visual is the #1 thing. If they choose what to eat in a restaurant, if they choose what beauty products to buy, the #1 governing determinant is how does this look? So, you know, it's a visual orientation. So that is what's governing what they decide to do. But brands need to be honest and transparent in the imagery they use in their marketing. Because this is also a generation which is very adept at manipulating its own images, whether that's selfies, whether that's holiday photos on their social media channels. So they're not going to trust brands which they can very quickly see are using the same visual trickery techniques. So what we start to see in visual marketing in a bid to win trust is this phenomenon of a lot of brands trying to be more realistic. eschewing the idea of using models. We've seen Vogue do model-free issues, for example. In marketing campaigns, we've also seen examples of campaigns which dispense with the idea of using models and just use everyday consumers to get more trust, get more reality into it. That's the principle behind the campaign we saw from the small goods company Don's. In Australia, they found 1,000 different real Dons across the country to become the people starring in their latest campaign. And in visual communication, we're seeing more and more brands embrace reality. So in a bid to win trust in the Netherlands, McDonald's, with its Instagram channel, has a strict no-filter approach to the imagery they're using there as well. And again, when we talk to consumers, they want transparency when it comes to the manufacturing process, the production process of products as well, if they deem them to be high quality. They want to see that. They want to see how these products are made. So we've seen this huge growth in food service in China towards the kind of open kitchen approach to sort of build transparency and build trust in that regard too. Now, this is not a new concept globally, and we're seeing how the open kitchen approach, the ante is being upped all the time in marketing in a bid to win trust. So Dodo Pizza, Russian company, rapidly expanding, they've got cameras showing you their kitchens. That's nothing particularly new either. But what they do here also is show you how many orders they're taking. They show you how much money they're making. Now, that is a new step up in trying to be more honest and transparent with consumers. And packaging plays a role here as well. Consumers are going to trust products more if the packaging is honest, not literally transparent, but shows you what ingredients are in that product. An example of the way things are going in the future around this is this barcode scanning app from the UK's National Health Service, which literally shows you how many cubes of sugar are in that product. So language, emoji-type imagery, consumers can understand and trust more easily. And when it comes to transparency on pack, I think brands are going to have to work harder to assert their credentials. So we get more examples like this of brands telling you exactly what are the health benefits of this particular product. Here we're looking at this protein pasta supplemented with insect grain to give it higher protein content, higher calcium content. So consumers are going to want brands to spell that out for them as well. But where this gets interesting is brands using visual technology and techniques to win trust. So virtual reality is being used by a host of different whiskey brands, not to give you escapism, but to take you behind the scenes, to show you inside their distilleries, to build your trust, to reassure you about the quality of those processes as well. We're seeing brands use Snapchat to build trust as well. The French supermarket chain You is using Snapchat stories to show you the story of how its seafood arrived in the store, and using the 24-hour frame of Snapchat stories to reassure you this is a short duration story, that its products are fresh in that regard. Then we have Waitrose, grocer in the UK, to prove its provenance, also using visual techniques. They strap GoPro cameras onto their cows to show you that their cows are roaming free and they're organic in that regard. So using visual techniques to prove that to you. So we know that streaming is a way of getting transparency and trust. We also know it's a way of selling, particularly in markets like China. The strength of people who are actually streaming their own content or viewing other people's content stronger than any other place in the world. Our data at Mintel tells us, huge proportions of people engaging with streaming as a way of embracing advertising content as well. And this has huge commercial opportunities to create sales windows. If Maybelline does, a Vlogger window live stream, they are getting a huge spike in their sales. So live streaming also has commercial prospects too. Let's look at other marketing opportunities, ways of winning trust. Now, the fact that we inhabit this era where brands used to advertise to us via the newspapers or via the television, not the same communication channels we contact each other. Now, brands, us, our friends and family, we all inhabit the same platforms. So the fact that brands are contacting you in the same medium that you'll contact your friends and family gives them an opportunity, if they're brave enough, to be more daring with their advertising. Talk to you a bit more like they're one of your friends and peers. So, sorry, we'll come on to that. I want to talk about why we want trusted brands. Now, here's an insight into UK culture from where I live at the moment. This is a dating show called Game of Clones. Now, I know with the country it gave you the Beatles, we also gave you this as well. So the principle behind this is we don't want to have a lot of choice. Yeah, I'm not talking personally here. But the idea is, you know, I don't want to spend time looking for my special woman or my special man. So instead, the concept between this game show is we're just going to have 8 versions of the same thing. I'll show you a little clip from this.
What would your ultimate fantasy look like?
Gonna make me my dream boy. Gotta have a nice perky bum.
Bigger, lovely.
Well, these lucky so-and-sos are designing theirs.
Is this real?
And get to spend a week with 8 of them.
Hi, I'm Danielle. These all look the same.
But
So hideous. But there is a point behind this, because I'm not saying that's how you should choose your partner, but consumers don't want to spend time searching. They just want shortcuts, and that's what trusted brands are. So if you look at this in other examples of media, we've never lived in an age with so much choice and opportunity, yeah? Look at what happened in America with the growth in cable channels. 129 available in 2008, only 17.3 viewed. That grew by 0.2. If I toggle this, it grew to 189. We don't want all this choice. We want trusted brands, the convenience of that. The stats in music are even more telling. So we've never lived it. You've never had so much music to choose from, yeah? 3.9 million songs sold as digital copies in America in 2011. Only 350,000 sold more than 100. And again, that doubled, that figure remained the same. We don't want this long tail of choice. We want trusted, fast-track brands. That's why someone like Disney is mopping up. Obviously, we know they've acquired lots of studios. They're mopping up the US box office. So just to say, the good news is, if you can get trusted, that's what consumers want. They want the convenience of trusted brands. So I waylaid myself earlier. Now I'm going to talk about how we have an opportunity to market to consumers in the same way that we talk to our friends and relatives. So we can have more daring campaigns like this. I call this kind of post-bullshit advertising. So this campaign from Coca-Cola, the Oasis drink here, it's summer, you're thirsty, we've got sales targets. It's telling you this is an advert. We're not lying about what we're doing here. We're trying to sell you our product. Don't stand in front of this poster. It costs a lot of money. So this kind of honesty and directness is the same way we communicate with each other, yeah? So if brands are brave, they can communicate to us like that. And the ante is being upped all the time in terms of transparency and honesty. So this wine company, Allet, doesn't just tell you how much it costs. They explain why the wine costs this much money, and they're telling you how much profit they're making. So this is a new level of transparency. The same principles are at work here with Everlane, fashion retailer, okay? They're doing a price breakdown of why this garment costs this amount of money as well. So this is something we're starting to see emerge in a bid to win trust. These are the most progressive brands which are doing this. And again, if we look at the sort of, Chinese elite consumers, big proportions want honest advertising. They're prepared to engage with this kind of content. So the extreme end of this, from a trends perspective of Mintel, we have a trend called accentuate the negative. The principles behind this are that brands can take this to an extreme and apologize for their mistakes, be honest about things, criticize poor service they've done in the past, and just like our friends do, yeah? All our family and friends, they've let us down at some point, but we forgive them if they apologize and make up for it. The fact that we communicate like that with brands now means brands could do that as well if they're brave enough. And there's some science behind this. It's called the blemishing effect. So academic studies showing if you give consumers 100 bars of chocolate, 2 boxes of 100 bars of chocolate, they'll be drawn more towards the box which has got a slight element of fallibility. If one of those boxes is, chocolate is slightly damaged. Fallibility is something which is human and appealing rather than sheer perfection. So we actually see that playing out at Mintel in the products we log, so particularly in the food and drink industry. So here's some great examples of accentuate the negative products. Ugley's chips, marketing the fact that these potato chips are made from potatoes which were deemed too ugly to be used in other areas of food service. Or Le Biscuit Moche here from France, which, slightly broken biscuits and then covered in chocolate, and that's the marketing behind that. Tony's Chocolonely, the pieces are kind of shattered here, and it's erratic. Now, that's designed as a metaphor for inequality in the chocolate industry as well. So we're seeing that play out in products. Something else, another way to win trust, is appeal to consumers' sense of going local. Consumers like local brands, small brands. Amongst all the consumers we've talked to about this, the Italians show the highest regard for this. 44% more likely to trust smaller businesses than large corporations. This is something which is increasingly important amongst younger consumers as well. So particularly in America, if you look at what happens between how much money you spend, how much of it stays in the community, 48% of every dollar spent at a locally owned business stays in that community. This is something millennial consumers really prize. It's only 14% if you're spending with a chain in that regard. This is why we're seeing the advent of local currencies all around the world. I just picked one here from London. It's got David Bowie on it. He's from Brixton in South London originally. Can only be spent in that community, used by people in that community. Keeps the money in the community. And when you're talking about sourcing, you really need to up your game. This is a product I had this in my kitchen. I bought these pistachio nuts at home. And sorry, you can't see this very well, but in the sourcing section here, it says produce of Iran or USA. Now, that's not good enough. You need to be a bit more specific about where your products come from, particularly if you're going to pick politically opposed countries in that regard as well. So we need more sourcing information. And we've got a trend locavore at Mintel. We see numerous examples of brands pushing the idea of local sourcing more and more. So Deja Vu in Malaysia only sells, locally sourced products. We're even seeing vending machines in Singapore which do the same thing as well, stocking local literature. So this could be manifested in lots of different ways. Now, yeah, I'm from Britain, so I always have to put my cards on the table when I travel around and say I didn't vote to leave the European Union. I don't think that was a good idea. But I'm using this example here to show you how a German brand is doing the most patriotic, most laudable work around local sourcing in the UK. It's actually the discount supermarket Lidl are the ones who are flying the British flag and talking about how they're sourcing products locally to win trust. So my point is you don't need to be from the native country to do this. So the final section here, I'm going to argue another great way to win trust is to be politically progressive. So no less a person than Jack Ma says, if you want to win in the 21st century, empower other people. He's not saying if you want to be nice, he's saying if you want to win, if you want to be commercially successful. So if you look at what's happening in culture, despite some things happening in politics, all the signs culturally are we're progressing as a society. Look at what movie won the Oscars in America this year. It's Moonlight, charting the ascent to manhood of a young gay black boy in Miami. Things are changing culturally. And brands are trying to tap into this to appeal to the millennial demographics. You get campaigns like this one from Diesel, channeling a bit of Tiananmen Square, channeling Donald Trump's desire to build a wall between the US and America to appeal to a younger, more progressive demographic. And this isn't just the right thing to do, it's the commercial thing to do. So McKinsey studies show you that the most successful companies in the world are the ones which have the greatest levels of ethnic diversity. And that's going to increase your profits. When we talk to youngest consumers, ethics might not be their priority in advertising, but decent proportions want campaigns that push a progressive agenda. When we talk to Chinese consumers, young consumers, they are prepared to pay a premium for ethical products as well. They're looking out for ethical campaigns from advertising too. And they're also looking for environmentally friendly products when they're paying a premium also. So, and this, can be very commercially successful. A brand like Lush, their whole business model is built on being progressive and ethical. And they do it so well, they're extremely successful commercially in that regard too. So there's a chance here for brands to win trust by setting the agenda going forward. Now I'm going to show you a video way back from 1990 from the American comedian Bill Hicks. Now he was lamenting at the time of the first Gulf War, that all the amazing technology we were creating as a species was actually being used for military ends, and he was dreaming how else it can be used. So I'll show you this brief video.
Weapons for all occasions. And everyone got excited about the technology, and I guess it was pretty incredible watching a missile fly down an air vent. Pretty unbelievable. But couldn't we feasibly use that same technology to shoot food at hungry people? You know what I mean? Fly over Ethiopia. There's a guy that needs a banana. The stealth banana. Smart fruit.
Well, Bill's dream is now really a reality. The advent of things like the Pouncer. This is a food-filled drone designed to be flown into disaster or famine-hit areas to supply food to people. And you can eat the drone as well, because the drone's made out of baked materials. So I'm just going to show you some of the most progressive innovations we've seen at Mintel. And, you know, if I'm trying to be a progressive brand to win trust, these are the kind of things I'm going to sponsor and I'm going to talk about to my consumers. Another great one from Australia, things like the Thank You range of bottled water, very overt, ethical products. These are the kind of things, you know, if brands want to set the agenda and sponsor, they can embrace. Another one here from Germany, innovation which avoids food waste. We know we waste a third of all the food and drink we produce, which is criminal. So this company, Fopo, freeze dries unwanted fruit and veg, turns it into a product which keeps in the nutrition and you know, lasts for a good, decent shelf life as well. So these are the kind of ethical things brands can sponsor. Now I'm going to close with this kind of rather alarming picture from the anti-Donald Trump march we saw in Europe from the feminist lobby. So I'm going to argue, if you want to follow one progressive cause to win trust, then your brand should be feminist. So we're going to look at this as being the right thing to do, but also the commercial thing to do as well. Because, you know, we live in a world where we have huge levels of inequality. The gender wage gap is still here. The United Nations says it's going to take 117 years to get equality at the current rate of progression. So here's the gender wage gaps we're seeing across APAC, pretty severe. And we are seeing activism in this region to, you know, try and combat the fact that, you know, women aren't just facing a wage gap, they're also being ripped off. Lots of consumer-facing brands are guilty of charging women a premium for the same products. You know, if you make it pink or purple, you can charge a premium which you wouldn't charge for men. Razors and things are the kind of things we're talking about here. So I think we often think inequality is only happening in, you know, less developed, distant parts of the world, like, for example, here from Iran. Now, this is a good, ridiculous example of sexism. So the Ayatollah in Iran has said it's okay for women to ride bikes as long as you do it in private. Now, I don't know how you ride a bike in private. You've got to have a pretty big house to do that. So women are sort of breaking that rule, flaunting it, posting things on social media. But we live in a world where, you know, Russia has effectively decriminalized domestic violence recently. You know, that is what the world we live in. We live in a world where sexual harassment is so frequent in Mexico City. The city authorities have created this. It's called the penis seat. They put this on public transport. It's got a sign above it saying, only men can sit here. To, you know, hammer home this message of how big a problem this is. So the idea that we've reached equality is simply not true. You know, we live in a world where 29% of Japanese women have suffered some form of sexual harassment in the workplace. So what can brands do? Obviously, they have a responsibility to change the agenda here. But again, the same McKinsey study says, the greater gender diversity you have, the more commercially successful your brand is going to be as well. And the studies out there are conclusive. If you empower women and bring about equality, you are going to bring a huge amount of money to the global economy. And that's why governments are trying to encourage brands to do this, to try and bridge this gap. So what can brands do? Well, they need to do it because if you don't start setting the agenda here, you're going to suffer. Uber has lost market share in the United States because they got embroiled in this very, very high publicity sexual harassment case of allegations of people being sexually assaulted, which they weren't seen to investigate properly. So we had Delete Uber trending. We had Uber losing between 18 to 25% of market share growth in Lyft. They're taking that off Uber as a result. People are saying they didn't like Uber's corporate culture. So we're saying this is the moral thing to do, but you know, if you're going to, it's also the commercial thing to do, yeah? So it's about appealing to the world's biggest minority. So 49% of people in the APAC region are women. So why would you alienate half of your consumer market? You need to appeal to this group. And also being commercially cynical, it's not just about doing the right thing. If you get into the hearts and the minds and the wallets of women, it makes sense as well because they live longer than men as well. They're going to keep buying from your brand for longer. They live longer than men in Japan by some distance. They live longer than men in Singapore by some distance as well. So what does this mean for marketing? Well, the most progressive brands who want to win your trust are actually trying to set the agenda. So we have brands like IKEA making sure they're sort of pushing the agenda in terms of parental leave and extending that to men and being very overt about that to set a progressive agenda. And then we have changes in marketing. So Unilever's done a big U-turn on its advertising as well. So several deodorant brands have used these very sexist stereotypes, you know, around women, and then very publicly, remember that accentuate the negative trend I talked about, they're apologizing for that, and they're changing track completely. The most spectacular example I've seen of that is from Brazil. This is the beer brand Skol. So on the left, you're seeing this incredibly sexist 1960s advertising campaign they did for their new Skol beer. They got destroyed on social media for how sexist this campaign was. They did a very brave thing. In public, they invited female artists to change their campaign from the one you see on the left to the one you see on the right, launched it as a new campaign with this Skol logo showing they'd done a U-turn with the arrow. So very publicly admitting their mistakes, saying we had a sexist culture, saying we are now going to change that culture, we are being a progressive brand, and doing all of this in public rather than hiding away from it. So that's a really spectacular example of a brave move by a brand. And the final one I'll show you, staying in the beer industry. I mean, the beer industry is doing the most progressive stuff in this, I have to be honest. Campaign from Stella Artois, Buy a Lady a Drink. Now, this is a campaign where they're supporting this initiative from Water.org. Water.org recognized that a lot of women in developing countries, their development is being stymied by the fact that, let's not hide away from the truth here. Their role is to find water and collect water. So they're leaving school very early, they're not progressing in careers. Water.org wants to stop that by providing safe water to people. So Stella Artois supporting out this campaign. If you buy one of these charitable chalices, that's contributing to that as well. So another great example of a brand not asking you to pay a premium, just setting the agenda and saying we're a progressive brand you can trust. So to conclude, we started out looking at Mr. Trump as an example of how politicians and the media have sowed these seeds of distrust amongst us and consumers. We've got too much amateurism. We've got confusion. Now, we are seeing a reaction. We're seeing more accountability happen in professional media, more accountability brought upon politicians and the media by AI as well. But we think these are the ways brands can win trust through their campaigns. Use visual techniques. Don't airbrush things. Use things like live streaming. Use things like VR to take people behind the scenes. Use Snapchat in that regard. We've also seen how people want trusted brands. I use the kind of awful examples of that dating show in the UK, but people want the convenience of trusted brands. It's something they want to believe in. And I think the bravest, most progressive brands can use some of the marketing campaigns we've shown you. They take advantage of the fact they're communicating with their audience in the same way their audience is communicating with friends and relatives. So be more brash. Dare to be more like their friends and family. Localism certainly appeals as well, but as I showed you the example of the UK, you can be a German brand pushing the localism agenda in the UK. You don't have to be from that country to do that. And then the final section we looked at, we think brands that are progressive, are trying to push the agenda, particularly around diversity, nationality, gender. They are the ones which are really going to stand out, and they're the ones which are going to win trust in the strongest way. So thank you very much for coming to this presentation.
Stuff there and some great case studies, great examples, and I'm sure the audience is left wanting for more. So we will move to a Q&A, and again, I'll just abuse my position as chair, if I may, just to ask you the first question to get things rolling. This activism and concern about ethics and trust and brands in the marketing space kind of reminds me a bit of where environmentalism was 10 or 15 years ago, and then carbon credits developed and everything else, and we ended up with greenwash, and again that just created more distrust to the point where if a big brand now claims to be doing something, be going green or doing something environmentally friendly, your kind of default is not to believe it. As trust now becomes a currency, and that becomes a marketing line for many brands, how long will it be before we move to trust wash, as we did with greenwash, do you think?
Well, I think since the period you mentioned, the ante's been upped. You can't really get away with not being the real deal anymore. You're going to get exposed very quickly. If you look, we're doing a big project at Mintel around ocean plastic at the moment. If you look at what's happening to Coca-Cola right now, the lobbying Greenpeace is doing against them, they've not got a leg to stand on. So Greenpeace is basically encouraging people to tweet photographs of Coca-Cola bottles on the beach and tweet that at Coca-Cola. Coca-Cola is almost every week is revising upwards the forecast of how many of their bottles they're going to recycle. So I think what's changed in that interim period is the cynicism is there, as you mentioned, but I think if you are saying we are this, you've got to be it, because you're going to get exposed. If you looked at Louis Vuitton, the example there. So you've got to be the real deal. And just to make a point about the ethical side of this, we're not arguing that consumers necessarily pay a premium for any of the things we've talked about. We're just arguing that it's going to become the new normal. Just as people don't expect brands to be racist, or they're not going to. They still let brands get away with being sexist, but that's rapidly changing. So I think it's just what consumers expect of brands, and they're going to choose the one which is the more progressive.
Okay, great. So let's move to questions from the audience. Is anyone brave enough to ask the first question? If you'd like to raise your hands.
You don't need to be brave. I'm not going to.
We have a gentleman down the front here. If you could just say who you are before your question, that would be great.
Hi, Ian Clay from Technical Publicity Asia. How much of this do you think translates to the business-to-business environment? Because there's an awful lot here sort of to go through. What would you say was the most important thing? People who work in the business-to-business environment are also consumers, but how much of this really drills down to the business-to-business sort of space, would you say?
I know we're obviously a consumer-focused company, but I think the same things apply, basically. When all the sort of B2B companies we deal with, they're always trying to put themselves in their consumers' shoes. So, a lot of the creative workshops and things we do, we're doing it with people who don't actually directly market to consumers, but they're the big companies we deal with are putting themselves in these shoes. So I think the same issues of trust apply, between, in trade as well, as not just facing consumers. That's why we started off talking about this in terms of media and politics. It's probably started there. It's actually, the commercial space is sort of, the next place where it's happening. So I think it's just as applicable. I really do.
Thank you.
Anyone else have a question for Richard? Gentleman on the right here.
Hello, hi, Charles from BBH. I loved some of the stuff you put on the screen, kind of brutal honesty in a lot of the advertising. And yet, in my experience over the years, clients have an almost kind of pathological aversion to brute honesty, that stripping back of facade. What are some of the best techniques you've used as Mintel? There's an element of objectivity in a research company in talking to clients about the advantages of it, because it actually goes against an awful lot of, I guess, how client organizations feel they should project themselves, especially in Asia, I would say.
Yeah, they are shocked by it. And I had to really fight to get our trend Accentuate the Negative published about 5 years ago, because there was so little evidence for it beyond some interesting academic findings. But we started seeing more and more campaigns which have populated that trend. And I do think, at the moment, there's a kind of great period where if you can do campaigns like the one we saw from Oasis, it stands out so much. I honestly believe you're going to see more and more of these campaigns. So if you're brave enough to do it now, you really got to stand out. But at the same time, I'm not arguing that there's still room for mystique. There's still room for, mystery around certain products and services as well. Like, I don't think these campaigns would work particularly well for the luxury market, for example. They don't necessarily translate into that idea. But I think more everyday products, I think they can definitely work. And I think the cleverest, the way of sweetening the pill, I think the cleverest way is being brutally honest, but coating it with something like sustainability. So the chocolate examples and things I showed you, they're doing that. It's like, oh, I don't know if I want to buy an ugly-looking potato chip or a slightly broken biscuit, but then you're making you realize, oh, it's great, it's clever because it's avoiding waste. And I think those kind of campaigns really appeal to the consumer's ego to a degree as well. So it's not going to work for everything, but I think kind of particularly FMCG products, things which are processed, I think it can definitely work for them. And I still think there's a period now where if you start doing that, you're going to stand out a mile.
Okay, we have around 4 minutes left, so time probably for two more quick questions from the audience.
I have another question for you. Have you ever seen an ancient movie called Crazy People with Dudley Moore?
I haven't seen that one.
It's all about exactly this. It was made in the 70s. There's a copywriter who goes mad, and he just starts writing the truth. It's very funny. But you could use lots of it in your next chat.
Okay, I'll check it out. I like Dudley Moore a lot, but I'll check it out, yeah.
Okay. I think one more question from me, if that's okay. I know what you're saying about there's no place to hide, particularly in the internet age where everyone is empowered with their mobile phone and so on. But that doesn't always cancel out the multi-million-dollar marketing budgets the big players have. So the Coca-Colas of this world, I'm sure that might regulate Coke's behavior, but it's, you know, if they continue to do that, they're not going to go out of business. Not enough people will stop drinking Coke. So these Darwinian forces that are based around truth that are at work, is there a danger they're just embedding the monopoly, and will they still, you know, can the small players still rise?
Yeah, because I think if you look at things like activism, you know, I know what you're saying about the marketing budget Coke has got, but you've arguably got a stronger voice as Coke, you know, because they're operating on that same platform. Your tweet versus Coke's tweet, depending on how interesting it is, or how powerful it is, can reach so many people. So that's the kind of level playing field that's been created between the brands and the consumers, and also a level playing field for smart startup brands. So as part of a sort of wider project we did around trust, we had so many examples of brands which have come from nowhere. By doing social media is very empowering for them, obviously. You know, if they get an interesting enough campaign, they can build their brand, get things which are shared very, very quickly. One more point to you mentioned, you know, brands being exposed, etc. I guess another thing to think about in terms of mystery going forward is you're definitely seeing the youngest generation of consumers. If you look at Gen Z, they're already being raised by digital parents. They're actually trying to take a bit more control of things, so they are operating more in closed groups. So that's probably the next sort of challenge. You know, how can brands sort of, you know, permeate that and appeal to them or reach them within their closed groups rather than something which is just spread out everywhere? I don't know the answer to that yet, but that's something they're going to have to
it's one to think about for Umbrella 360 Asia 2018, I think. So on that note, I think we'll have to draw to a close there. Before we do thank Richard, a reminder that we're about to take a break for lunch, but we've still got plenty going on. At 1 p.m. on the Asia stage, we will have our lunchtime debate on the future of the CMO in Asia. If you're going along to that, feel free to pick up some lunch in the exhibition area and indeed take it in with you to the session. Seats will be on a first-come, first-served basis, so do get there early if you want to be certain of a place. There'll also be more masterclasses during lunch. The masterclass theatre is located just on the left when you go into the exhibition hall. And don't forget to explore the expo if you haven't already. At 2 p.m. we will reconvene in this room, and there will be an in-depth interview with Jayesh Iswaramani of Inmobi, and that will focus on the dark side of mobile advertising. So with that, I think that brings us to a close. Just to say, check out your Mumbrella 360 Asia app to see what's happening for the rest of the day. And if you want to ask Richard any more questions, I'm sure he's going to be around now for lunch, so please do so. In the meantime, please join me in thanking Richard for a great presentation.
Thank you.